on this beautiful day. Let's start with the good news, because we deserve some good news, Lord knows. Change in total number of hospitalizations is down again. This is the number that we have been watching because the great fear for us was always overwhelming the hospital system, the capacity of the hospital system. And we've added capacity, we've moved equipment around, but the great fear was always overwhelming just the raw capacity of the hospital system, the number of beds. So the number of additional net beds was always important to track, and that's what we see here. The net beds is down to 53, which is the lowest number since we started doing these charts. So that is a good number. 3-day average, which is a little more accurate than the day-to-day, which tends to fluctuate, is also down, as you see. Total hospitalizations, 18,700. But you see the 18, 18, 18, 18. That's the so-called flattening of the curve. The apex isn't just an apex, it's a plateau. You see that line flattening, and that's what the experts were talking about, that it might have been a straight up and then rapid down, or it might be up to an apex and the apex becomes a plateau. That's what these numbers suggest. Change in ICU admissions ticked up. Again, the ICU admissions is a little questionable now because almost all the beds in a hospital have turned into an ICU bed. So how hospitals classify ICU admissions is a little dubious to me, but that's my personal 2 cents. 3-day average on ICU admissions, the same thing. Tick up in the intubations, which is not good news, but you see yesterday was great news. That may have been a blip in the overall. The intubations are very relevant because people come into the hospital, they get treated, hopefully they get discharged. If they don't get discharged, they stay in the hospital, they decline, they become intubated. If they become intubated, the longer you're on a ventilator, the less likely you will be to get off that ventilator. So that's the trajectory we see, right? And the intubations, most people who are intubated will not come off the ventilator. So that's a troubling number, the intubation number, which is real. But the 3-day intubation rate, again, is down relative to where we were. So all the numbers are basically saying the same thing. Number of discharges goes up because we had that high hospitalization rate. People stay for a week, 2 weeks, they get discharged. That's why the discharges are a function of the hospitalization rate. 3-day average of the discharges, you see, again, basically flat. So it's all reinforcing the same thing, a flattening of all these numbers. You're not seeing a great decline in the numbers, but you're seeing a flattening. And you're also seeing a recurrence of the terrible news, which is the number of lives lost, which is 758. Somebody asked the question once, can you ever get numb to seeing these numbers? Unfortunately, no. 758 people lost their lives in a 24-hour period. I speak to many families who are going through this, many people who lost loved ones. Everyone is a face and a name and a family that is suffering on this weekend, which for many people in this state and in this nation is a high religious holiday, which is already distorted because we have churches closed, we have temples closed. So this is truly tragic news, and I want every family to know that they're in our thoughts and prayers, and we're sorry that they had to go through this, and I want them to know that New Yorkers did everything humanly possible to be there for their loved ones and try to save those lives. And we're proud of that. You see also a flattening in the number of lives lost at a terribly high rate. But if you look back over the past several days, you see there's a certain continuity to that number. Again, that's the one number that I look forward to seeing drop as soon as I open my eyes in the morning. And it has been flattening, but flattening at a terribly high level. Again, to put it in context, 9,385 lives lost when you add those from yesterday. Put in the context of 9/11, which was supposed to be the tragedy of my lifetime, 2,753 lives lost. We're now at 9,385. Big question for everyone is, when do we reopen? People want to get on with their lives. People want to get out of the house. Cabin fever. We need the economy working. People need a paycheck. Life has to function. When do we reopen? When do we reopen? Look, the answer is we want to reopen as soon as possible. Everyone does on a societal level. Everyone does on a personal level. Let's just end this nightmare, right? Groundhog Day, you get up every day. It's the same routine. You almost lose track of what day of the week it is because they don't even have meaning anymore. And there's all sorts of anxiety and stress that we're all dealing with. So we want to reopen as soon as possible. The caveat is we need to be smart in the way we reopen. What does smart mean? It means a coordinated approach, a regional approach, and a safe approach. Nobody wants to pick between a public health strategy and an economic strategy. As governor of this state, I'm not going to pick one over the other. We need a public health strategy that is safe, that is consistent with an economic strategy. How do you reopen, but how do you do it in a way that is smart from a public health point of view? The last thing we want to see is an uptick in that infection rate and an uptick in those numbers that we work so hard to bring down. So we need a strategy that coordinates business and schools and transportation and workforce. What New York Pause did is it stopped everything at the same time. It was a blunt device, but it shut down everything at the same time. We're going to need testing, more testing, faster testing than we now have when you start to move people back to work, and we're going to need federal help. There is no doubt about that. I did a joint statement with Governor Hogan, who is the chairman of the National Governors Association. He is a Republican. I am the vice chair. I'm a Democrat, for those of you who don't know. And we did a joint statement that said, look, the federal government did a stimulus bill, a bill that was supposed to help move the economy along, called the Federal CARES Act. The Federal CARES Act just almost ignored state governments. When you ignore a state government, you ignore our situation. We have a $10 to $15 billion deficit. We got a budget done, but our budget was basically contingent on what happens going forward. And without federal assistance, how does this state economy come back? How do we really start to fund schools, et cetera? And that's going to happen. That has to happen from a federal level. There is no level above a state government that can make a difference besides the federal government. And we did a statement on a bipartisan basis that said the federal government has to fix this in the next bill. And we called for $500 billion for funding for state governments. And again, we did that on a bipartisan basis. From New York's point of view, the past bills were like most federal past bills. They went through the political process. And to get a bill passed in Washington, everyone has to get their piece of the pie to pass a bill. I understand politics. I understand it very well. That's not how they should be operating here. And you did an injustice to the places that actually had the need, which, from an American taxpayer point of view, that's what you were trying to correct. You were trying to correct the devastation of the virus. Well, then correct the devastation of the virus. Not everything has to be an opportunity for pork barrel, right? You look at where the money actually went. Theoretically, the bill distributed funding to states for corrective action and expenses on handling the virus. Kaiser Health, which is a very notable organization, said that Nebraska, Montana, for example, Minnesota, are getting approximately $300,000 per COVID-19 case. New York State gets approximately $12,000. How can that be? It can be because in the Senate, it became a game of political pork, and I want my share as opposed to where is the need genuinely. And New York is vital to this American economy. It's not just about New York. Our economy is vital to this country. You want New York's economy up and running, not just for the good of New York, but for the good of the nation. So that was the purpose of the legislation. It missed the mark. I hope they do it next time. A simple, easy way to help New York is right the wrong that the federal government did when it passed the SALT tax, state and local tax deductibility. That was just a political maneuver in the first place. You're trying to help places that are suffering from the virus? Repeal the SALT tax.